The Underwear Olympics are officially underway in Indianapolis. Day one of the Combine testing is now in the books for defensive ends, defensive tackles, and linebackers. Who were the big winners from a Seahawks perspective? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Part 2 Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be back in the saddle with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're down in Tumwater, Washington, or listening from Hollywood, Florida. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The first day of testing is in the books in Indianapolis. Defensive ends and edge rushers, defensive tackles and linebackers. We're going to be diving into all the big winners coming out of that first day of testing at Lucas Oil Stadium. And we'll have the latest on some contract negotiations and potential cap casualties for the Seahawks coming out of Indianapolis. All that coming up in a jam-packed episode. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Throughout this week, I don't know that I've ever seen a head coach become more frustrated. He was joking about it, but more frustrated about the constant questions about Geno Smith than what Mike Macdonald was this week. And you can understand because the guy's pretty close to the vest, pretty straight shooter when it comes to his assessment of his players. And he has been really honest about this for the last month and a half, that Geno Smith is going to be the starting quarterback to open 2025. And of course, there's fans out there that think that this is a smokescreen, but John Schneider continuing to hammer home the idea that number 7 is going to not only be the starter in week 1, but they're hoping to get him inked up for the next couple of years on an extension, reiterating that today on Seattle Sports, indicating that they will be meeting with Geno Smith's agent tomorrow on Friday to begin really diving into this and see if they can put together an extension. John Schneider now twice in 3 days, Rob, has said that Geno Smith is our guy. It is clear. Look, I understand that fans are going to look into words trying to find ones that want a different quarterback. They're going to look into words and try to find something different to interpret. But I don't know that John Schneider and Mike Macdonald could be more clear that number 7 is going to be the quarterback and they want an extension. They're not just wanting to go into this year with him on one last year of his contract. It's pretty darn obvious at this point that that's what the organization wants to do.
Yeah, it certainly sounded that way. You know, I happened to catch a little bit of that show on 710 with Seattle, the Seahawks color commentator Dave Wyman and of course Bob Stetson. And and one of the things that was interesting to me about that conversation, Corbin, was the fact that John Schneider basically said, "Look, we're going to be meeting with Geno Smith's agent, that's Shafi Fields, and he is going to be meeting with the Seahawks, I guess, are going to be meeting with." Geno Smith's representatives tomorrow. So on Friday at the Combine, we know just looking at historically that the Seahawks have pulled an awful lot of their free agent moves, their extensions in the week or so after the draft. And as you said, I mean, John Schneider, as well as Mike Macdonald, have both said over and over again that Geno Smith is their guy, that they were going to be meeting with his representatives here at the Combine, and that they were anticipating some type of an extension to be able to keep Geno Smith into the field into the fold, for the long term here for the Seahawks. So I think that there is very likely to be some type of a news, next week or so that Geno Smith's contract has been extended, lowering that cap hit, keeping number 7 on the field. And I think that it makes an awful lot of sense just because the fact that he has been a productive player, he is playing at a high level. Look, the salary cap numbers that people are throwing out there are not as cost prohibitive as maybe you might think, especially considering the fact that the numbers are just so much north of what was anticipated here with the NFL extending the salary cap, or just making the salary cap a little bit larger than was expected. Then it just allows Seattle a lot more wiggle room. Geno Smith is the quarterback here that is Seattle's best opportunity to compete in 2025. You're seeing quarterbacks in NFL teams throughout the league are basically kind of recommitting to their guys. You see the New Orleans Saints recommit to Derek Carr. You're seeing the Minnesota Vikings even are basically saying, look, hey, we may keep Sam Darnold in tow at this point. So I do think that you are going to see NFL teams are basically going to hitch their wagons to the quarterbacks that they already have, because this quarterback class in 2025, at least at the draftable prospects, does not look that good. I think the Seahawks fans should be celebrating this news just because of the fact that, again, Geno Smith is a quality player. If you build up the defense and the running game around him, then I do think this can be a deep playoff running team. And that feels like that is exactly John Schneider and Mike Macdonald's preference moving forward.
We've talked about this already ad nauseum, but it's not like the Seahawks are in a position they can go up and get one of the top quarterbacks in this draft class anyway. They're not going to be getting Shedeur Sanders or Cam Warden. And let's be honest, it doesn't feel like a year where there is kind of that can't miss guy that's at the top of the draft board anyway. And so there's really not a better option unless you're thinking you can bring Sam Darnold. And look, you're going to have to pay the same price for Sam Darnold that you're going to be paying for Geno Smith. And is Sam Darnold going to be able to do what he did in Minnesota with the personnel that Seattle has right now and the offensive line not being as good? At least it wasn't last year. There's a lot of questions. And I mentioned this in the show earlier today, our first Thursday show, that I believe the Geno Smith extension, I think there's a really good chance that it happens before Ernest Jones gets his new deal. And there's one reason why: $23 million. And that is how much money the Seahawks can trim off their salary cap. That's the max that they can trim with an extension. And I think a 2-year, $90 million extension, so you're looking at $45 million per year, and maybe tack on a void year at the end. John Schneider's been more willing to do that now, and why not? The cap's going up big time every single year. You can take those void year hits and you can absorb them pretty easy. That allows you to kick a lot of that non-prorated money that he got from his incentives bonus and that $10 million roster bonus that's due on March 16th. You can spread that out as a prorated bonus as part of the extension. And now the cap hit is under $30 million for this next season. It gives you a lot more flexibility. Now you can go pay Ernest Jones with some of that money that you just saved up. So March 6th, when they extended him a couple years ago, I think that's going to be the sweet spot to get it done at this time. As far as other news with the Seahawks, we're expecting Geno Smith news to drop any day after the combine. That this is going to be an extension that's going to happen. Maybe it won't. We'll see. But it just looks like everything's trending towards that. But there are other moves that are, in the basket right now for John Schneider to open up some cap space. And the first one today, Jordan Schultz, the reporter who's been in the news for some other reasons this week, but he announced that the Seahawks have allowed Rayshawn Jenkins to have the option to go out and try to find a team to trade for him. That doesn't surprise me at all. We thought a cap casualty candidate. That's probably still what's going to happen. You have that, and then you have the Cheney Nwosu's roster bonus deadline that was moved back. And John Schneider confirmed today it's because they're trying to do a process with restructuring his contract to lower the cap hit for this upcoming season. So we got two moves there on defense. It definitely sounds like they want to keep Uchenna Nwosu. They just want it at a lower salary cap hit this year. And Rayshawn Jenkins is basically, hey, we know what we're going to be doing with you. If we don't move you, we are going to give you the courtesy to go see if anybody is open to trading for you, and maybe we can get a conditional draft pick or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the fact that you just used the word courtesy. And I think that absolutely is in play here with the veteran that is Rayshawn Jenkins. He's going to be entering his 9th year in the NFL. And, there's so many times, Corbin, I've been going to the NFL Combine for, last 2 decades or so. And as we'll talk about in a couple of moments, there's a reason why I'm not there this year. But the familiarity of different agents, different general managers and coaches. You have John Schneider, who, of course, is one of the longest tenured general managers in the league. And you look at a player like a Rayshawn Jenkins and the fact that he is represented by Peter Schaefer, another longtime NFL agent, and I happen to know is a personal buddy of John Schneider. And Rayshawn Jenkins is a good football player. He's a guy that, because he was wearing basically a club for a hand, missed missed 4 games this past season, wound up having 53 tackles this past year. But look, the writing is on the wall. Seattle's going to go with a younger player. Coby Bryant seized the opportunity when he got, when Rayshawn Jenkins went down with an injury. And obviously Julian Love, as the Pro Bowl player that he has proven himself to be. Jarek Reed, there's an awful lot of excitement in the building about him as well. So why not give that courtesy to Rayshawn Jenkins, to Peter Schaefer as the agent, to be able to kind of kick the tires on some of the different opportunities that are out there. This is an intriguing safety class, but it's one that frankly is a little bit like some of the other positions in this class. There's some high profile athletes, not a lot of guys who have the production that Rayshawn Jenkins has. I mean, again, this is a guy that has shown the ability to pick off passes, certainly is a big time tackler. He is one of the better, if you were going to compare him to some of the safeties in this draft class in terms of size, in terms of just the thumping ability that Rayshawn Jenkins possesses, he's a good quality football player. You might be able to coax an NFL team to give up a late round draft pick in a trade for Rayshawn Jenkins. If not, Seattle could save $5 million in releasing him. So I do think that this is, as you said, a courtesy move. See if there is another NFL team out there that might be willing to peddle you a draft pick. Maybe you swap spots in the 6th round or something like that. Give another NFL team, the ability to be able to bring in a quality veteran player at a reasonable salary point. But I don't see Seattle bringing Rayshawn Jenkins back at his current salary, just because of the fact that, again, I think that Seattle has younger, better, cheaper players already on the roster. Not every NFL team can claim that.
And they've also got 9 draft picks right now with the compensatory selections that they are going to get. So there's a chance they can go pluck another safety in the draft and add him to the mix as well. And Coby Bryant still got 1 year left in his rookie deal. Maybe he gets an extension. They've got flexibility there. This is really, again, it's a courtesy to Jenkins because I think there's a respect there and saying, look, hey, things just didn't work out because of that injury. Sometimes fate plays that way for NFL players. But the Seahawks are hoping that maybe they can get a team to give them something for Rayshawn Jenkins so they can give him a chance to go somewhere he's going to play a lot more. And they're also hoping they can get Uchenna Nwosu's cap hit number down and figure out how to work that contract so that he's still on the roster, but it's not as expensive or cost prohibitive this year. There's a lot going on in Indianapolis, and we're going to have plenty of news to break in the next week or so as some of these moves start to continue being negotiated between John Schneider and the front office and these players' respective agents. When we come back, day 1 in the books for athletic testing, we're going to talk about the defensive tackles and hybrids, the guys that can play inside and out that really helped their stock today in Indianapolis. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks Thursday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's time to talk some winners. Day 1 of the NFL Combine testing. And listen, we make the joke about it, the underwear Olympics. That's what it is. I mean, these guys are not playing actual football. But this is still meaningful, especially when you're talking about big body defensive tackles. It's a really good chance to evaluate the explosiveness and the overall athleticism of these big dudes. And there were some defensive tackles that put on an absolute show today. There are also a couple of guys that we would view as hybrids that if they're 280, 285, they can play defensive tackle. If they're 265, 270, they can play edge. Those guys are always fun, especially in Mike Macdonald's defense. We've got a couple guys like that we'll talk about. But I want to start with a little smaller school, some action here to kick off our discussion. And this is kind of leapfrogging up the Senior Bowl because if you were watching clips coming out of Mobile, Darius Alexander from Toledo had a phenomenal week in Mobile. And he did some damage against some of the best offensive linemen in this draft class. And you saw the twitchiness from him there. You go back and you watch him against MAC competition, clearly had penetrating ability, was extremely disruptive. He goes out at 305 pounds and runs a really fast 4.95 40-yard dash. And maybe this is what impressed me the most, Rob. At over 300 pounds, a 7.6 three-cone drill. That is flying for a man of that size in terms of agility. 31.5-inch vertical jump at that size is pretty good too. Alexander, to me, is a guy that helped himself even more today. I thought he moved himself into potentially being a late day 2 pick with his Senior Bowl performance. Now you can make an argument this guy might be a second rounder, even with the depth in this defensive tackle class. A bunch of them are going to be gone in the first 32 picks. A guy like Darius Alexander could fall into the lab of teams in the 40s and 50s and be well worth that selection.
Yeah, he's a penetrator. He's a guy that has the great lateral agility that came through in that 3-cone drill, as you just illuminated. I want to talk about another big defensive tackle that actually ran the exact same 40-yard dash time, came in even heavier, and that would be Derek Harmon from Oregon. Previously at Michigan State, 4.95 seconds in the 40-yard dash, a 1.74 10-yard split, and just his size. And we're talking about a guy who, again, is 6'4.5", 313 pounds, 34 3/8-inch arms. I mean, this is a guy who is big, he's powerful, he's very long, and as he demonstrated with his 40-yard dash time, that he is explosive as well. And so, you know, a little bit different in terms of just the level of competition. Obviously playing in the Big Ten previously, I guess Oregon's now considered the Big Ten as well, but previously the Big Ten at Michigan State, and now at Oregon. Obviously the Oregon Ducks having the success that they had this past season when they did beat the eventual national champions Ohio State Buckeyes. Derek Harmon was arguably the best player on the field for Oregon. I mean, he absolutely took over that game at times. And so again, for him to be as explosive in a straight line speed as he was at that size, I think it just absolutely cements his place as a first-round selection. Now, there has been some questions about his, just his consistency. And that, to me, is one of the fascinating things about the combine. We're going to get into that a little bit more as we go, about some of the guys who just work out, like the old expression, work out like Tarzan, play like Jane. I'm curious to see some of the players you're going to highlight here, and if their production on that Lucas Oil Stadium field, if it actually translates into production on the football field.
Well, the next player I'm going to be talking about had great production on the football field at Arkansas, and that's Landon Jackson. And look, I've liked this kid since I watched Arkansas play a couple years ago. He jumped off the tape, and he is not going to wow you with a bunch of bend. He's not Gumby. He's not one of those guys that is super malleable in that regard, but he doesn't need to be. I mean, this guy's 6'5", 280 pounds. He is a bull-rushing wrecking ball that has really good hand usage, and I just love the way that he can take up space so quickly. Like, this guy can collapse the pocket in a millisecond because of how long he is. And seeing what he did today, I expected he was going to test well, but not what he did. 4.68 in the 40-yard dash. Again, he weighed in at 281. 6'5", 281, and ran a sub 4.740. And then this is maybe the most shocking to me. How often do you see a guy that is 6'5", 280 pounds? Like, tall guys like that don't normally do as well in the vertical jump. He had a 40.5-inch vertical at that size. The explosiveness. He was in the top 3 for broad jump the entire day, too, as a 280-pounder. And look, I wish he would have done the 3-cone of the short shuttle, because I would have liked to see some of the change direction stuff, because, again, that's the weak point to me on the film. But he was even more explosive than I expected. And look, we're talking about Seahawks-type players for Mike Macdonald's defense. This guy can play 5-tech. He can play stand-up 9-tech. He can play 3-tech. He can even play nose in passing situations. Arkansas is using it. You can move up and down the line. I'm really excited about this kid, and just seeing the way he tested. He does have the production. Had a 12-sack season a couple years ago for Arkansas. So this is not a guy that's just a workout warrior. And I thought he just further bolstered his stock.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, he's had some spectacular seasons against SEC competition. The size, speed, explosiveness, all speaks for itself. As you said, 4.68 in the 40-yard dash. The 1.65 10-yard split is the second fastest of any of the defensive linemen that was tested so far. So that definitely was impressive. 40.5-inch vertical jump. And
that looks like a typo.
Yeah. Exactly. Except that the broad jump followed up with that, and that was one of the things that was so exciting to me. 10'9" broad jump. I mean, again, that's one of the things like that. That was the one caveat I was going to mention there with Derek Harmon. Look, I love to see big guys move really, really fast. Obviously, that's really exciting. At the same time, if you just shut it down after the 40-yard dash, or if you have an explosive 40-yard dash, but the vertical jump or broad jump, other tests that demonstrate explosiveness are not nearly as impressive. Like James Pierce, for example, edge rusher for Tennessee, who had an unbelievable 40-yard dash on 4.47 seconds for a guy who's 245 pounds. I mean, that is unbelievable. But then he had a 31-inch vertical, a 10'3" broad jump. I mean, look, I know that we're trying to highlight the guys who wowed, but there were some guys who just kind of checked the box as far as red flags. That, to me, is one of the most exciting things about Landon Jackson, is that he did all, or at least most of the different events. Derek Harmon, going back there earlier, did not. And I would like to see guys who actually check every single box and demonstrate that athletic ability. So that's why I'm going to mention a guy that we talked about before, Nebraska's Ty Robinson, that, 4.83 seconds. I mean, that was fastest among all of the players that were listed as a defensive tackle, at least by NFL.com. That includes a 1.71 10-yard split, a 33.5-inch vertical jump. No, that's not as explosive as, the aforementioned Landon Jackson, of course, but we're also talking about a defensive tackle, not a defensive end, not a guy who played stand-up half of the time. Also did the three-cone time, 7.58 seconds, not bad. 4.5 in the short shuttle, also pretty solid for a guy of his size. And to me, one of the reasons why he made my list as a riser in this, Corbin, is that I did not think that he was an elite athlete. I think he's a damn good football player. I love the instinct.
Yeah, he shocked me with the numbers, to be honest.
Exactly. And that's what I get excited about, because I think there's sometimes the combine allows us to gush about these elite athletes. And look, I am as big a fan of athleticism as anybody. But if you want to watch the Olympics, if you want to watch a Michael Phelps or a Simone Biles or whatever, fine. Watch the Olympics. If you want to watch football, Ty Robinson can play football, and I'm impressed by his athletic ability. And that is always one of the big questions that people ask. Would you rather see a good player actually surprise you in the workouts, or a guy that maybe doesn't have much production, but then just puts up unbelievable numbers in the workouts and then makes you think, wow, what could this player be? I'll tell you this, 20 years of doing this, there's an awful lot of players who wow at the combine in Indianapolis that plummet when it comes to plummet when it comes to production in the NFL and in college football. And there was an awful lot of those so-called underwear Olympic kind of guys this year at the combine.
And I think that's a perfect segue for the last player that I want to talk about real quick, because if we're looking at versatile players that can move up and down the line, Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M had 1.5 sacks each of the last 3 seasons. This guy did not have the on-field production that you would think a top 10 pick did. Now, I've gone back and watched Texas A&M film, and I see a guy that's way better than the numbers suggest. You have to go back and you have to look at the tape. And I do think the system that he's played in at Texas A&M has also impacted those numbers quite a bit. I think you put him in an NFL scheme where he's able to play outside more and really utilize his athleticism, then you've got a chance to unlock the sack potential for this guy. But there's still, that is a red flag, the production. There's no question. But the numbers are just off the charts. Shamar Stewart, 4.59 40-yard dash, a 40-inch vertical jump, 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump. So even more athletic than what Landon Jackson was. And this guy came in, and this was kind of a red flag to me initially. He weighed 280 at the Senior Bowl, and he was 267 today. And so I'm like, what position is this guy trying to audition for? But then you see him go out and do what he did, and how explosive he looked at 280 pounds in Mobile. If anything, he just showed teams, hey, I can do both. Whatever you guys want me to do. I can be an edge guy. I can play inside more. Just let me know how much I need to eat. And I've got the athleticism. But there's obviously the production concerns. But to me, this guy has good enough tape. And with this athletic testing, I can't see him slipping out of the top 15.
No, I think he's going to go high. I think a lot of players have gone high. I'll mention a couple of first-round picks that didn't have numbers quite as explosive as Shamar Stewart. There's no question. In terms of the combine and the workouts, Shamar Stewart was the easy day one winner. of the combine. There's no question about it. I mean, just his size and his speed. But, what about Jordan Davis? You saw the Philadelphia Eagles just dominate the Kansas City Chiefs for the Super Bowl. How many times did the combine superstar a couple of years ago, Jordan Davis, make those plays? Not very often. How many times did Javon Kinlaw make those plays? Former San Francisco 49ers first-round pick that was supposed to be the big thing. How many times did Malik McDowell make those types of plays? Now, again, none of those three players put up the type of workout numbers that Shamar Stewart did. The one that put up similar numbers to Shamar Stewart, and those of you who are watching combine footage, look, and I got to be respectful here. I have a lot of buddies in this business, and there have been some comparisons I've heard now to Myles Garrett. As you said, Corbin, this kid, Shamar Stewart, had 1.5 sacks each of the last 3 years. My math says 3 years times 1.5 sacks. It's a total of 4.5 sacks in 3 seasons. Look, I know he had pressures. If you're going to compare him to Myles Garrett because their workout numbers in Indianapolis are similar, then compare Myles Garrett's 32.5 sacks over 3 seasons at Texas A&M to Shamar Stewart's 4.5.
That is laughable.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the thing, is that let him be a top 10, top 15 pick. If he winds up going to the Seahawks at number 18, I will be excited about his upside, because I do believe that the Seahawks have the coaching staff that might be able to untap this kid's potential. But let's be clear, that's what you're doing here. This is a very raw player that, as you said, is basically his weight has changed. The physicality, the instincts has never been there consistently. And so he was listed at 290 pounds by Texas A&M, goes to the Senior Bowl, is listed at 281 pounds, goes to the Combine, now he's 267 pounds. Again, what exactly is he? If I want a guy to come off the bus and be impressive looking, Shamar Stewart is your guy. If I want a player who actually is going to make big football players, then I think there's an awful lot of other defensive tackles in this class and a much better price point on the draft that the Seahawks should be able to win with.
When we come back, we're going to transition to pure edge rushers. And, of course, we got a few off-ball linebackers as well that we're going to be talking about that were the stars of today's combine testing in Indianapolis. Don't go away. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks Thursday edition. I'm Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my coach in crime, Rob Ray. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Day one of athletic testing in Indianapolis for the Combine is in the books. We just looked at defensive tackles and the hybrids, the players that can play outside and inside depending on weight. They have the ability to play all over the defensive line. Let's take a look now at the pure edges and the off-ball linebackers that stood out today. And I want to start out with a player that I know you and I are both very high on. And I'm going to admit this. I wrote down this player as a second-round fringe first-round selection when I was putting together my listings going into this week. I am fully on board now for this kid to be a first-round selection, and that is Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, one of my favorite names to say, and one of my favorite players to watch in all of college football this past season. 16.5 sacks for the Eagles. And look, when you're talking about a guy, I know he's on the smaller side for an edge rusher. He weighed in at 247 today. But he ran a 6'9", 6'3" cone. And here's the thing, it shows up on film. I call this guy Gumby. That's his nickname for me because his bend is as good as I have seen in the last 10 years from a pass rusher coming in. He has that ability to just flatten the top of his rush, and he's obviously explosive out of the line of scrimmage. But his ability to just narrow down that path to the quarterback and not drift upfield and really be able to bend around the ankle flexion that he's got, you don't do that without that kind of agility. And sub 7 seconds, that's just flat out ridiculous. And again, this guy is not a combine warrior. 16.5 sacks this year, more than 20 tackles for loss. I think this kid has a chance now to go in the top 15 picks, not just being a second rounder. And this is a guy that teams are very high on. And I can tell you that from my couple of days in Indianapolis, that there was a lot of buzz about him before he did this today. Pass rushing production is what teams want. And now you've got the athletic tools to go with it. This kid is an absolute stud.
No, he is. And that's one of the things. There's a couple of players like that. They're a little bit stubby, but also have the explosiveness and the lateral agility. And so I love the fact that you were highlighting him, because I think that the production and then the statistics at the, during the workouts absolutely match. That's the thing, is that I am always, concerned about players that work out so much better than they actually produce on the football field. And he certainly does that. I'll tell you another player that does that. And that's David Walker. And this is a guy from Central Arkansas that, you're not expecting a guy at that lower level to be able to have the type of athletic ability that he possesses. I mean, these are guys that you normally see wind up transferring to a big time program. I mean, this kid was very, very productive at Central Arkansas, but again, he's kind of a stubby frame. He's 6'1", he's 263 pounds. He had 31 sacks and 63 tackles for loss, 6 forced fumbles in just 3 seasons. He winds up getting invited to the Senior Bowl. He was terrific during the week of practice. He had 2 sacks in the game itself, and then goes to the combine, has a 4.69 40-yard dash time, 7.15 3-cone, and 4.39 short shuttle. Are not as explosive as the BC pass rusher that you just highlighted, Corbin. But at the same time, again, to me, the story is very similar between both of those players. A stubby frame, a guy that, and both players are very powerful, have good lateral agility. I actually think that Walker is even more powerful, as Enrique, in my opinion, is a little bit shiftier. But still, those are the kind of guys that I think can be very successful as edge rushing specialists in today's NFL, especially in a scheme like Mike Macdonald's, where sometimes you're going to be asked to put your hand in the dirt, but often for guys of these frames, you're going to be asked to just, stand up, rush the edge. I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the Seahawks, basically push that contract conversation back with Uchenna Nwosu. And of course, we know the way that the Seahawks have, Boye Mafe and Derek Hall and the production that they have had so far. Would not be surprised at all to see the Seahawks take advantage of this edge rushing class, because it is a good one. And Seattle, while they have some young talent available, still, when you can, kind of cash in with some of these quality players that fit in Mike Macdonald's system, it's wise to do so.
We've seen a little bit of a trend in the last 5 or 6 years where we're seeing a lot of guys that were off-ball linebackers in college that translate to edge rusher and become absolute studs. There's been several examples of that. And I'm wondering if we're seeing the next one in front of our eyes coming out of Alabama. And that is Jihad Campbell. And he watched the guy run today, 4.52 40-yard dash, a 1.53 10-yard split, 10-foot 7-inch broad jump. This guy put up elite numbers today at the combine, but Alabama was utilizing him as an off-ball linebacker the last couple of years. Now, did he have some pass rushing production? Yes, they utilized him as a blitzer, but his body type, his athletic skill set, and those blitzes, like, he looked like a natural pass rusher. I believe Jihad Campbell's future in the NFL isn't as an off-ball linebacker. It is going to be moving full-time to the edge position, and with that kind of twitch. And listen, there might be some teams that want to use him at both. Maybe he's going to be a Zach Bond type player, like we saw Philadelphia do. But this guy's got more size than Zach Bond. And I just think Jihad Campbell, when you turn on the tape, I don't see a guy that is a top-of-the-line off-ball linebacker. I'm wondering if this guy could be a sneaky first-round pick, though, because there's going to be teams that look at the physical traits and the fact that he did have productivity in a different position feel like, I think I can unearth more moving his position in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I was ready to kind of jump on you a little bit as far as the Jihad Campbell, because I don't see a guy who has the instincts to play the inside linebacker position, at least for most teams. Now, again, Mike Macdonald's system, where it's mostly run downhill type of production, where you're asking the defensive lineman to basically take on blocks. That's one of the things. Jihad Campbell did not do a great job of taking on blocks, shedding in the hole, what we have known to be kind of stereotypical Alabama big, gruff linebackers. But his explosiveness as a pass rusher, that is intriguing. So I do think that you make an excellent point about how some team could find him, maybe like a Jalen Walker, to me, the best, kind of edge rusher, combo linebacker of this draft class. And he's getting all kinds of buzz. There's a reason why he sit out of this workout today. But Jihad Campbell, I think, really kind of turned the light towards him a little bit, because there's no doubt about that he is a terrific athlete. I'll tell you another good football player that had a pretty darn good day. And maybe this is just regional bias, but Carson Bruener, the linebacker from the University of Washington, again, he has NFL instincts. Of course, his dad is Mark Bruener, a longtime scout with the Pittsburgh Steelers, former first-round pick all those years ago in the University of Washington, tight end by the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is the team that he now scouts for. Carson Bruener has always been one of those guys like, oh, he's an instinctive guy, he's a physical guy, he's a tough guy, he's a productive guy. 104 tackles this past season, 3 interceptions, 55 yards in return. So he's not just the guy who catches the ball; he actually can do something with it. And then he goes out to Indianapolis, and this guy who's supposed to just be a good football player but not a good athlete, winds up running a 4.58 in the 40-yard dash, 9.11. I would love to see him get to that 10-foot broad. I think that he'll probably wind up doing the broad jump again when University of Washington has their pro day. Talk about guys that actually are going to move the needle a little bit. Some of these guys are such athletes on film. You can tell that they're going to work out well. They just don't play well. Carson Bruener, like some of the other players we talked about today, Corbin, he is one of those guys that plays well, and then the athletic testing at the combine just proves that there is still some untapped potential and a reason why he was as productive as he was in several quality seasons at the University of Washington.
There are a couple other off-ball linebackers that I could have mentioned as the winners, but I want to talk about a guy that just has solid film when he's been healthy. There's been some injuries sprinkled in there for Danny Stutzman when he's been in Oklahoma. He missed a few games at the end of the season, but when he's been healthy, he's been a really solid off-ball linebacker. He was actually getting some buzz before this upcoming season as a guy that could be one of the top off-ball linebackers in this draft class. Maybe he's reaffirming that value with what he did today. The numbers he put up, a 4.52 40-yard dash. The 10-yard split is insane, 1.53 seconds. So you're talking about a guy that can quickly get downhill. 10-foot, 7-inch broad jump, so really explosive. And again, this guy was coming off an injury. He missed a few games at the end of the season for the Sooners. To see him come back from that and come out and perform the way that he did, and this is a guy that has gotten a lot of praise from the coaching staff in Oklahoma. He's a leader. The guy loves to hit. He's a really sound tackler, has some blitzing ability, and with his athleticism in modern NFL, you believe he at least has the traits to be able to cover in the league. And I think Danny Stutzman, as much as any linebacker in this draft class, helped himself out today. And really, again, it might just be reaffirming value that he had pre-injuries, but this is a guy that has had some really good tape, and now you put the athleticism with it, and he's a bigger guy than some of the linebackers in this class. Still not your prototypical linebacker, but still has pretty good size even for today's linebackers.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the thing is. He had to prove his range and he had to prove his medical. And, of course, we're not going to know the medical information for a while now, but still, this was a big day for Danny Stutzman, and he knocked it out of the park.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow on our Blue Friday episode, we're going to continue diving into the big winners from day 2 of athletic testing at the Combine, and we'll be diving into some different position groups. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks.